Hey y'all, and welcome to this week's From the Vault episode from the Magdalen House podcast. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Dallas, Texas, and known affectionately by many as Maggies. Every first and third Wednesday, we bring you a new release, and our From the Vault episodes, we share podcast releases from our 3 different podcast series, Recover Ed, Recovered, Interviews with Alcoholics, and Hope for the Family. Our podcasts aim to connect, inspire, and educate alcoholics, loved ones, and the community to the Magdalen House and the services we offer. We are so glad that you're here. Thanks for listening.
Hello, and welcome to Recover Out Loud. My name is Kelsey Amos, and I'm happy to introduce myself as the new host of our series, Studying the Steps. I'm super excited. Today, our guest is Kelly, and she is one of my very favorite people. She is going to be talking to us today all about step 1. So, Kelly, if you just want to introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Yay. Thank you. I am Kelly. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 29th of 2019. I'm also the volunteer coordinator here at the Magdalen House, and I love my job. I get to be surrounded by cool alcoholics all day long, and it's great. But yeah, I'm an alcoholic, first and foremost. So like for me, a big part of step 1 was knowing what an alcoholic was, because when I got into, like when I started doing the steps, and when I was introduced to this book and introduced to alcoholism, really just like as a whole, I didn't know what an alcoholic was. I thought it was just somebody who didn't know how to drink right, and I definitely didn't know how to drink right, and so I thought, well, okay, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, but I had no idea that there was more to alcoholism than just not drinking right or not being able to control, like portion control in regards to alcohol. And so, you know, I knew that I had a problem, but I didn't fully understand like the magnitude of my situation. Like I was under the impression that I should be able to control myself, but I was doing a really bad job at it. Yeah. To the point where towards the end of my drinking, I had convinced myself that I did not want to stop drinking. Because I just couldn't, like, there was no way. Like, I thought that my subconscious was like, no, we're just going to drink ourselves to death. That's just what we really want. But I had no idea that I could not physically stop once I got started. And I had no idea that when I wanted to stay stopped, like, I couldn't. Like, it's just no amount of willpower could keep me from taking that first drink that would start me on a spree. And so I went to treatment for the very first time back in 2019. And it was there where I learned about what alcoholism was and that there was a way to not drink and be happy at the same time. But I had no idea what an alcoholic was. And so one of the things that I learned that really blew my mind was like the definition of an alcoholic as defined in the Big Book. And so like I felt like I knew that I was crazy when it came to alcohol, but also when it came to a lot of different things.
Like how so? Can you give an example?
Like I felt like I was crazy because I kept going back to drinking even if after I told myself I didn't want to do it anymore. Like there were moments, like of course there were moments earlier on in my drinking when I told myself that I shouldn't drink anymore, but I kept going. But towards the end of my drinking, it was you had to be crazy to keep drinking. And so I thought I was just an insane person because, you know, I'd be towards the end of my drinking, I was living in a trailer on my family's property. And I remember there was one night where I had such bad withdrawals because it was one of those times where I decided I wanted to stop drinking. But my withdrawals were so bad, I felt like if I laid down, my heart was going to beat out of my chest. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And so what I did was I just paced back and forth in my trailer. I took a shower, laid down on the shower floor, and I literally thought that I was going to die that night. And I just remember praying, just being like, whatever's out there, if you could just, you know, help me make it through this night. Like if I could live, I promise I will never drink again. And the very next day I was drunk again. And so I thought I was just a crazy person. Because I didn't know what my problem was. I thought I could potentially be a normal drinker, I hoped that I could be a normal drinker, but it never occurred to me that I would never be one of those people, which is fine. I'm happy about it. But in the big book, it actually outlines what my so there's two parts to alcoholism. There's my mind, which like I kind of had an idea of because like I kept going back to drinking even though I didn't want to. But there was another part, the body aspect of alcoholism, which I had no idea about.
Yeah.
A lot of alcoholics are different in like the body aspect. Like I know some people are able to control and enjoy their drinking for a really long time in their lives. And then all of a sudden it's like a switch flips and they can't control themselves when they start drinking. Yeah. But for me, as far back as I can remember, I drank like an alcoholic. Like
Same.
Yeah. I remember the
very beginning. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was like, I didn't notice because everybody around me drank the same way, or it looked like they did. It looked like alcohol had the same effect on other people as it did on me. But I remember my first drink, it was Kool-Aid and Everclear, which like, very classy. But I remember having that drink and, taking my first sip and really liking it, really liking it, because I felt like I was an anxious person, and I am. Like, I've always been an anxious person, but I was like so anxious. And so taking a sip of that alcohol kind of made me feel less awkward. It made me feel funnier. It made me feel more attractive. Like, it made me feel all of the things that I wish I already was. And so after I finished that drink, I remember just reaching for the bottle and just chugging it because it was like I could not have enough.
Yeah. So it wasn't the flavor.
Oh, no. Absolutely not.
Yeah. I heard somebody share in a meeting. Somebody asked me why I drank and if it tasted good. Like, absolutely not. Yeah. I don't drink for the flavor.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, I never even liked the taste of none of it. Mm-hmm. I think the only thing that I really did enjoy were like the taste of were like ciders, but there wasn't enough alcohol content in those for me to really, really like them. So I rarely ever drank those. I drank purely, just whatever would get me to that good feeling place. Yeah. But the problem is that I could never stick. There's like that sweet spot where you get to when you're drinking. And I would always drink past that. Yeah. And it, because it turns out I have the body part of alcoholism, which is I've got an allergy to alcohol. So when I put alcohol into my body starts craving more alcohol. And I was a blackout drinker, so I blacked out a lot when I drank. And I heard somebody talking once about why is it that even in a blackout, I continue to drink? And so that's what really hit it home, that this body aspect of it, like when I put alcohol into my body, what happens after that is a purely physical reaction, because it's almost like my brain shuts off and my body keeps going. And so I really liked that analogy to it, because it really felt like I was on autopilot when I started drinking. Yeah. Like I just couldn't stop. Or like I would change my mind. So there were it would look like I was changing my mind. So there were a lot of times I'd go out and say, I'm only just going to have a couple. And then I'd have a couple. And then I'd think, well, a couple more sounds good, actually. Right. I don't have to work tomorrow. So yeah.
So when you first got introduced to this body and mind that we have a physical allergy to alcohol, what was your initial response to that? Like, did you readily accept it, or did you kind of struggle with that idea?
It explained a lot of things. For me, I clung on to it because it explained a lot of things about me that I couldn't explain before. And so I was, the treatment center that I went to was a month long. And I think that it finally absorbed into my mind by around my second week, when my now sponsor came in with another group of ladies and went over steps 1, 2, and 3 in the big book. And so she was talking about her experience, and she explained the body and the mind, and it literally felt like she was talking to me, like about me. And so I definitely, I identified with all of it pretty straight away. Yeah.
And the reason I ask that is because I know for me, when I first heard this body and mind and that we have a physical allergy and phenomenon of craving and all that stuff, I just thought it was crazy. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because in my mind, when I think allergy, I think, you break out in hives or something like that, because I have food allergies. And so I was closed-minded around it until I had enough experience to where it made sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly think that at that point in like my journey, I was so desperate for relief that I would have believed really anything that came out of my sponsor's mouth. I was like, you know, and like part of me I didn't fully believe that this program would work really. But at the same time, it was like, I can't do this on my own anymore. So like, I'll give it a shot. I was just so desperate. Anything, because I had tried so many different ways to get sober. I probably haven't tried everything, but I had tried so many different ways to get sober that, you know, by the time my sponsor came in and explained everything, it was like, well, if this is true for her and this sounds like it's true for me, then it's probably true. And I just got to do this thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So did you try some of the ways like it talks about in the book?
okay, I can tell you.
Do you want to?
Yes.
Should we read that
yes,
part?
let's yeah, because I haven't read anything from the book. Let's find it. Where is that in the book? See, one cool thing about reading this book is you don't have to memorize it to be a good recovered alcoholic. 31?
Yeah.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. One funny thing about this, too, is when I was in my treatment center, I highlighted this and then wrote "ha-ha" next to it because I thought it was funny. So it says on page 31 and more about alcoholism, it says, here are some of the methods we've tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, but my ego wouldn't let me do that, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with and without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum.
So what's your version of that?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, this list is really interesting because it increases from, it's like it just starts off with trying to control the drinking. And then as it goes on, it's trying to just stop drinking.
That's a really good point. I'd never noticed that.
Yeah. Somebody pointed that out to me and I thought it was interesting as well. Yeah. But I mean, for me, it was, I switched what I drank. So I used to just drink beer, and then I thought maybe I would enjoy my drinking and be able to be slower about drinking if I switched to something more expensive. So I started drinking wine, which has a higher alcohol content. And so I definitely did not take my time when drinking that, like stick a straw in that and call it a day.
Yeah.
I would not drink while I was at work, but eventually I ended up drinking while I was at work. I would give my ex-husband my debit card to keep me from buying it, which I would circumvent by going around the house and collecting spare change. I would not drink around family. I, started going to therapy, and eventually I went to treatment. At one point, I thought it would, and I've tried a lot of different things like exercise and yoga and reading self-help books. One of the fun things that I tried doing was keeping chickens, because I thought that if I had like 20 chickens to keep track of, I would be too busy out in the yard taking care of these chickens. And unfortunately, it just meant that I was like drunk, falling down in the chicken coop and all the chicken poop. It was very bad. So those poor chickens.
That reminds me of when I hear people say, oh, I'll just get married and that'll keep me sober.
Oh, no.
And then it's like, oh, I'll have a kid and that'll fix me, or I need a better job, or I need this. So chickens will not keep you sober.
Yes.
Okay.
They will not. They definitely will not. Because a lot of these things that I can do, a lot of these things that I try to do, I just end up drinking while I'm doing them. So like trying to get more exercise, I'm going to get drunk and exercise at the same time. Like I rode my bike out into traffic because I was drunk, because I was trying to exercise to not drink. And so none of these things worked for me. I had not gone to a health farm or sanitarium until I went to my treatment center that I went to. So there are some things that I know that I hadn't tried, but I had tried enough to realize that there was no way I could stop myself from drinking. And once I sobered up, I was able to look back on my experiences and realize there was no way I would be able to control my drinking. Because, you know, there was ample evidence that when I started, I couldn't stop.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And then, you know, my sponsor told me that this is a progressive illness. And so I thought, well, if it's bad now, then it's going to get worse.
Right. Yeah.
So I should probably change something. So,
Yeah.
But I mean, the body aspect is just one part of it. There's the mind too, which convinces me that I don't have the body aspect of it, that I will be able to control and enjoy my drinking, that I do deserve a drink. I remember towards the very end of my drinking, I had gotten into an accident and ended up going to the hospital because I was suicidal, and I told my family. So they had me go and spend 10 days in the hospital. And I thought, like, the entirety of me being in there, you know, I was sober 10 days. And the whole time I was in there, I thought, you know, like, this is the worst it could get. You know, like, I've lost everything that was important to me. I'm never going to drink again. And, you know, the first thought that came to my mind once I got released from the hospital was, okay, where's the wine? Because I thought that the alcohol, I thought that the wine would make how I was feeling inside more bearable.
While you were in the hospital, had you made that firm resolution? Like that you were never going to do it again. I'm not going to drink again.
That was not, you know, that wasn't the only time. You know, when I was lying on the floor in my trailer, I made that firm resolution. You know, every time I did something embarrassing or dangerous, I made a firm resolution. Before I had external consequences, like, I didn't experience very many consequences in my alcoholic career.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to talk about. Too, for sure.
Because your consequences don't make you an alcoholic. A lot of people think that, like, oh, I have to be the homeless person drinking out of a paper bag under the bridge,
right?
You know, or I have to have gone to jail or any of these things. But for a while, I was an alcoholic, you know, long before I started experiencing consequences. So I like to joke that night that I got in my accident and went to the hospital was the night that I experienced all the consequences I could possibly experience just in one night. But, like, yeah, I made a lot of firm resolutions before it even got really bad. And the thing is, too, is, like, I meant all of it. Every time I made a resolution, anytime I told myself I was going to stop drinking, I meant it. I didn't want to drink anymore. But I would always end up drinking. And so that's what made me feel crazy, and that's what made me look crazy to, like, my family members, to, you know, my ex-husband, to my coworkers. I looked crazy, but it was completely out of my control, you know, and that's the whole thing about step one is this is out of my control. I can't control what happens when I start drinking, and I can't control whether or not I end up drinking when I wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
It's like a coin toss, but it's like a two-headed coin. You know, in the morning when I wake up, I'm flipping the coin and seeing if I'm going to drink, and I will end up drinking. If not today, then tomorrow. So, okay, let's read from the book a little bit. Okay. So step one is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And I am powerless over alcohol because I can't control what happens when it comes into my body, and I can't control whether or not I drink. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the body aspect of alcoholism, which is on page XXVIII, which I hated this page when I was in treatment because every single group that would come in to carry the message, I could just hear it in my head. All right, let's turn to page XXVIII. But I've come to love this page.
Yeah, it's very handy.
It's very, very handy. Yes, so on page XXVIII, it says, we believe and so suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So the person who's writing this is Dr. William D. Silkworth, and he saw a lot of alcoholics in his lifetime, in his practice, and realized that there was a small percentage of them who just kept coming back for treatment over and over and over again. And so he thought to himself, with a bunch of these other doctors, that there must be a reason for that. And so they, developed this theory that our bodies are different as well as our minds. So they suggest that the action of alcohol in these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. So for me, an allergy is something that, I don't know about you, but it's something that I can't will away. So if I put a substance into my body or onto my body that I'm allergic to, I'm going to react to that regardless of how much I don't want to.
Yeah.
So I have an allergy to a sulfa antibiotic. If I take it, I'm going to get sick and I'm going to have to go to the hospital. It's very inconvenient.
You can't just be like, no, I'm not going to have a reaction.
Not today.
And then it's like,
not feeling
okay.
it. Yeah.
Wouldn't
So
that
that's
be
going to
nifty?
happen regardless. So the same thing is true for alcohol. Whether I want it to happen or not, I'm going to have this reaction. And my reaction to it isn't, like a rash or my throat closing up. It is a craving for more alcohol. That is the reaction that I have.
Yeah.
It's this phenomenon of craving that it talks about. And it's limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So all of those people, or most of them, I don't know, a lot of the people that I drank with growing up, they looked like they drank like me, when in reality, I was a budding alcoholic.
Yeah.
They didn't experience alcohol the same way that I did, which that fact really didn't hit home until like a year into my sobriety, when I was able to just kind of like look back on that time in my life and realize none of those people experienced alcohol the way that I did. They might have just wanted to get drunk, right? But it was like, for me, it was physical. I couldn't stop drinking even if I wanted to. It says these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. So for me, that means I have to be careful of the things that I put into my body, because it's a physical reaction. I need to be careful about it. Just as if I was allergic to some sort of food item, I need to be careful. If I'm deathly allergic to a food item, I'm going to make sure that what I'm eating doesn't have traces of it in it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I have to do with I have a
yeah.
allergy to tree nuts
Yes.
and certain kinds of fish. So I have to always ask or read the ingredients.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I have the sanity to do that, whereas with alcohol, it's not there.
Yeah. I remember there were so many different food items that I really liked before I got sober, and I was like, why is this so delicious? And it turns out that, yes, tiramisu definitely has Marsala wine in it, and so that's why I loved it so much, and I couldn't stop eating it.
It makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the thing for me is, after a certain amount of time, if I knew that this is what happens to me, that when I drink, I can't stop drinking, and bad stuff happens, or I do something embarrassing, or I drunk dial my boss, which has happened on numerous occasions, and she never fired me somehow. So, but when those things happen, why can I not stop? If I know I can't drink right, then why can't I just stay sober? And so eventually my drinking, or my trying to moderate my drinking, turned into trying to just not drink altogether. And I just couldn't do it. So it says down at the bottom of the page, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. Their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. So I can't tell you the amount of times where, and this happened to all of us, but these times where I've gone out on a spree, or, I've gone out, or I've stayed at home and drank more than I intended to. And the next day told myself, I'm going to lay off of it for a while until some sort of trivial thing comes along. And that ends up being my excuse to start drinking again. So it's, I've had a bad day with drinking. I'm going to lay off, but, it's Taco Tuesday. Got to have a beer with my taco. Or, my husband brought something home with him, better join him, I can't just sit and watch someone else drinking and not drink, or some sort of celebration, or it was just a really awful day and I deserve to have something.
Yeah.
So the truth is that when I drink, I get drunk and bad things happen. But the false is this time's going to be different. I deserve it. This is a good reason. People are going to think I'm weird if I'm not drinking, things like that. And I love that their alcoholic life seems the only normal one, because there was a point towards the end of my drinking where it was like I couldn't imagine my life without alcohol. Like, alcohol was always there. It was helpful to me. It was a good solution to the problems I was having, you know?
Yeah.
At some point, it turned into, it was still my solution, but it started causing more problems than it solved, right? So I remember, you know, all throughout growing up, my anxiety was the reason I drank. Right?
Yeah.
And then as I continued drinking, more things became the reason that I drank. So like, yeah, I drank because I'm anxious, but I also drank because I'm depressed. I also drink because I have no friends. I drink because I'm in this bad marriage. Now I drink because I'm divorced. Now I'm drinking because I had to move from California to Texas. So there was always something that I felt like I was drinking around. But at some point, all of those things that I was drinking about didn't even compare to the amount of destruction that I caused in my life. So I remember one time I was sitting down with my sponsor, and she asked me, you know, because I was telling her, I drink because my ex-husband, blah, 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 blah. And she asked me, or she told me, Kelly, there's a lot of women who drink because they're divorced. There's a lot of women who drink because their husbands are abusive, but they don't drink themselves nearly to death. And so that's, you know, when I realized that the people in my life, the things that happened in my life, the circumstances in my life aren't the reason I drank. It's because I drink because I'm an alcoholic.
Are you or someone you know struggling with the inability to stop drinking? At the Magdalen House, we believe that alcoholic women deserve a place to recover with dignity. In our 2-week residential program, clients will be introduced to what alcoholism is and what alcoholism isn't, as well as be presented with a solution, all in a loving and supportive environment. All of our programs are at absolutely no cost, and because we accept no government money, we can accept women all over the world and stick to our own curriculum. If you want to stop drinking and cannot, call 214-324-9261 for a phone screen.
So it goes on to say on page XXIX, after they've succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. So since we're sticking to step 1, I'm not going to talk about that entire psychic change, but just, you know, as a spoiler, you get that psychic change by doing the rest of the steps. So for me, my big question was, if I'm destroying my life, or if alcohol is destroying my life, why can't I stay stopped? And so one of my favorite paragraphs when I was in treatment is on page 22, because I felt like when I read it, it felt like it was my brain talking. So it's in the very middle of the page, and it says, why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it that he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he sometimes displays with respect to other matters? And I remember talking to my counselor when I was in treatment and just asking her, like, why? Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep trying to destroy myself? Like, why can't I just behave like other people? And it literally is just because I'm an alcoholic. Like, it felt like such a complicated problem, alcoholism did. But when this body and mind aspect was explained to me, it really simplified it, because there's nothing in my past. You know, it's nobody's fault. There's not this, you know, one like triggering event in my history that I have to identify through therapy. It is literally just the reason this happens is because I have the body and the mind of an alcoholic. Yeah. It's a very simple explanation to a very simple problem, right? And so once that kind of like got into my head, then I realized that, okay, this is a simple problem, then the simple solution should be good. It should work. Yeah. So it did. So it says on page 23, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while, he may tell the truth, and the truth, strange to say, is he usually has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really do not know why they do it. And so, this was a realization that I came to when I was in treatment, was basically, I don't know why I drink. Because I drink when I'm happy, and I drink when I'm sad, I drink when I'm bored, I drink when I'm angry. So there's nothing that causes my drinking other than my brain, right? So on page 24, it says, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. So this part was a little bit confusing for me. I understood that I'm powerless over alcohol in my mind and my body, but at the time when this was explained to me, I thought I was still choosing sometimes to drink.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was choosing to kill myself, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was my
and
choice.
Not really knowing why.
Exactly.
My sponsor asked me in the very beginning when she was going through, step 1 with me, and she just said, every time you picked up, did you think you were making that choice? And I said, yeah, because I can remember when I would make that firm resolution, I'm not going to do it again. But then the way I remember every single situation is that, I just changed my mind. I changed my mind. I'll quit tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so the obsession telling me that I'm changing my mind, it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
And scary.
It was really scary. And because the thing that was scary about it for me was when I realized my truth in this, was realizing that when I got out of treatment, I was going to get drunk. I was going to drink again.
Yeah.
That was my big aha moment, was when this was explained to me. I knew when I got out of treatment, I didn't know when and I didn't know why, but at some point I was going to drink, and that was terrifying to me, right? I hear that that's a scary thought a lot for the women who are in the house. They're saying, so you're saying we're going to drink when we get out of here? Not necessarily, but it's realizing that if left up to my own devices, if left up to me, if I am the one who's trying to keep me from drinking, I am going to drink again because I have no power to choose. I have no power over it, right? So it's a scary realization, but at the same time, it's a relieving realization. Because if I don't have power over whether or not I pick up a drink, then that means that I don't have to try to not drink, right?
Yeah.
It took a huge burden off of my back. And it also took a lot of shame out of it, because I realized that it's not my fault really that I get drunk. It's out of my control, right? So when it switched from, there's a part in the book that one of the first things that my sponsor had me write in my big book was in forward to the first edition. So in the forward to the first edition, in the middle or the very end of that first paragraph, it says, many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. My sponsor had me write, I'm not a bad person next to it, because I was convinced that I was choosing to drink, and so therefore I was choosing to hurt the people that I loved.
Same.
Right?
Yeah.
But because I'm sick, I don't have the power to choose. I'm not choosing to hurt those people that I love, right? With my drinking? No, not at all. I don't have the power over it. So that made me feel a lot better.
Yeah.
Right? And the cool thing too about this program is that I'm so used to making firm resolutions to not drink again. One of the cool things about this is I'm not making a firm resolution when I start doing this. I am doing something different, right? I'm not choosing to not drink because I can't. Mm-hmm. I'm choosing to do something else because I can do that, right?
Yeah.
I'm choosing to follow in somebody else's footsteps.
Choosing to build that defense.
Exactly. Yeah. Because what worked for them could work for me. I believed that. Yeah. It says our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So like the things that I did in my spree were humiliating to me a lot of the time. I mean, one of the most humiliating things for me was deciding to not drink and then getting drunk. It was very shameful, and I was very disappointed in myself every time, I'd wake up in the morning thinking, oh man, I didn't want to drink at all. Why did I drink?
Or especially if you told someone, hey, I'm quitting. I'm not going to do this anymore. And then, the next day they're like, oh, what happened to not doing this anymore?
Exactly. Yeah. And you're like, well, I can't hold myself accountable. No one can hold me accountable. But like, so that humiliation and that disappointment in myself, and then sometimes the consequences that I experienced, like they were bad and enough for me to make a firm resolution to stop drinking. But after a certain amount of time, and that window of time would get smaller and smaller and smaller the longer I drank. But at a certain time of sobriety, being completely sober, I would take a drink. And I would remember what happened on my last sprees most of the time. But those feelings that were attached with them, that shame, disappointment, and humiliation, didn't compare with the relief that I would experience with taking that drink, right?
Yeah.
So those feelings that came with my spree were not brought to the forefront of my mind with sufficient force. That drink sounded a lot more tantalizing. And so the thing with this is like, I was in treatment, and so I was kind of, I was separated from alcohol. But my sponsor still took me through the steps really quickly because she understood that I had a limited amount of time to hold on to that desperation that I experienced as a result of my last spree. And I'm really grateful that she did that, not just because it kept me sober, but because it allowed me to experience the promises that the big book offers quicker. Right? Yeah. So it's not just guarding me against taking another drink. It's so that I could experience the freedom that comes along with it sooner.
Yeah.
Right? So I actually, from realizing my truth in step one, and step one I took on my own, right? My sponsor just helped me to understand that I took it. Step two, I was really concerned because all of the steps, we were going through them so quickly, but she was doing that for a reason, and it's because of this paragraph, I've got a week to a month, sometimes like less than 24 hours until those reasons for me drinking start getting a little fuzzy. So what else should we talk about, Kelsey?
What about on page 25?
20?
But little history, but if something is in italics in the big book, it's really important because...
Oh, you want me to say?
Yeah.
Oh, because it was expensive to print that stuff. This was written back in the 30s, and so they had to use printing presses, and those italic letters are very... exciting. Yeah. And so they're a little more expensive. So they really wanted to make sure that their point was taken seriously by paying a little bit extra for those italics. So anytime that something is italicized in the big book, pay attention to it.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, there's italics on page 25. So, I felt like kind of like beat down and hopeless when my sponsor explained what it is that is my problem. But thankfully, on just the very next page, so we just read page 24, on the very next page, it tells me that there's a solution. So I'm like, thank God. So it says there is a solution in italics. And then what I think is pretty funny is that it follows it up with almost none of us liked it. So it says there's a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which this process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others and had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. This is something that gives me hope even now when I'm working my program. If I don't feel like doing something related to my recovery, like if I don't feel like going to a certain place, or I don't feel like talking to somebody, if I don't feel, like sending my nightly review to my sponsor, I just have to remember that the people who wrote this book, almost none of them liked having to do these things, right? But they did it because they saw that it's what was required of them, and it worked in others. So anytime, and also recognizing my willingness early on. So if I'm not feeling like doing something, I have to remember that willingness that I experienced, you know, early on in my recovery. Anyway, but it says, when therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We found much of heaven and have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. So
I love that.
I know.
I thought it was cheesy.
Oh my gosh.
When I first read it,
I was
what is
really?
this fourth dimension stuff? And then, you know, but now the way I word it is that, I mean, this is a borrowed line from a well-known speaker, but that this is the best life I've ever known, you know, and it is like a completely different life being recovered.
Yeah. There is it in Dr. Bob's Nightmare? How he says, though my old way of life was by no means a bad one, I wouldn't go back to it even if I could.
Yeah, I think that's Dr. Bob.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. My old way of life was not a very good life.
Yeah, no, mine was terrible.
But the things that I've been able to experience in sobriety, it blows my mind every day. And it's not just like the experiences that I've had. Like it's pretty wild that I can pay my bills on time. Yeah. And it's wild that I have a car now and like an apartment and stuff like that. But it's also the weird moments in my day-to-day life where I realize how at peace I feel.
Yes.
Like, do you ever have those times when
Absolutely.
you're doing something and it's not a normal time where you would feel at peace, but you realize that you are? I think the first time I felt that was when I was on a bus. Before I had a car, I was on a bus heading home after like a long day at work, and I was just looking out the window and I thought to myself, oh, I feel really good right now. Yeah. And it was like the first time that's ever happened to me. But yeah, like I wouldn't trade any of the moments that I had back then with the moments that I have now.
Yeah. I remember when my sponsor told me in the beginning that if I, work the steps to the best of my ability as honestly as possible, then one day my mental obsession would be removed. And I thought she was crazy. And so when it happened further along in the steps, I just remember one day I was sitting at the bus stop and it was like really nice outside, probably like 70 degrees. And I just looked up and closed my eyes and the sunlight hit my face and warmed my cheeks. And I was just like, oh.
Did you feel weird?
This is peace. It felt good.
I had to call my sponsor and ask her if it was okay. I was like, is this okay?
Sometimes, like in the beginning, I did notice like I would have to call her because I would fall into these self-sabotage kind of tendencies of waiting for the other shoe to drop. If there's no way life is this good right now, yeah, it's good. You know? And there's problems. There's always problems, but
it's good even like despite those or regardless of them.
Well, yeah, because we don't have to drink over them.
Exactly.
We don't have to kill ourselves.
I get to help other people over them.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
How rewarding is that?
That is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. But the thing is like, so what it talks about here on page 25, I've seen that it works in others. I was approached by those in whom the problem had been solved. So there was no way, I didn't know anything about myself as an alcoholic before, even while I was in treatment. I didn't hear anything about, at least it wasn't absorbed by my brain. A group might have come in and talked about the body and the mind, but I would not have known about who I was as an alcoholic if another alcoholic hadn't come and talked to me. And so it's
that message of depth and weight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I was able really to have my step one experience because somebody else came in and explained to me that my situation is pretty hopeless. Yeah. Right. And it sounds like a big downer, right? Like, realizing that you're hopeless, but it's in that and realizing that my situation seems hopeless, that I can't control what happens. That's when I find freedom, because that's when I learn to stop trying to control the things that I can't.
Yeah.
Because how exhausting is it to have to do that?
Oh my gosh.
I was exhausted.
I don't think I realized how much energy I was burning up when I was out there until I finally.
There are moments too in sobriety when I realize I'm trying to take control back and I start getting exhausted. And I'm like, why am I so stressed out? And I realize it's because I think I can do a better job at controlling my situation than my higher power can.
Yeah.
So, but it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say to someone who maybe thinks they're an alcoholic but isn't so sure about working the steps or anything like that?
Well, the steps aren't the only way to sobriety. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of different ways to sobriety. The thing with this is that it worked for my sponsor, and I thought it could work for me, and it did work for me. So if you feel like the steps aren't for you, that's completely fine. I'm not going to force anyone to do anything. Mm-hmm. Especially since this is like a simple program, but it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. I would never want someone to have to do this if they didn't have to do it. So if someone's out there who thinks, that they're an alcoholic, which only you can diagnose yourself as an alcoholic. Someone's out there who thinks that, but you're not too keen on doing the stuff out of the book, you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
However, just to kind of drive home the point of how well it's worked for me and the freedom that I've experienced because of it, if you've tried a lot of different things, there is no harm in giving this a shot. I'm grateful that I did. And the thing is, if you try it and it doesn't work for you, that's okay. There's other things.
Yeah.
So, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It did. So you said that you can diagnose yourself. So how would someone diagnose themselves?
So there is actually, in the big book, there is, this is a chronic disease where you can actually diagnose yourself as a sufferer of it, which is pretty cool. So there's actually instructions for how to diagnose yourself. So on page 44, it says, these are the conditions for being an alcoholic. On page 44, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. So for me as an alcoholic, when I put alcohol in my body, I can't will it to not produce a phenomenon of craving. And when I want to stay stopped, I can't stay stopped. And the non-alcoholic are people who can enjoy, control and enjoy their drinking or can stop on their own willpower. So it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, so that's my mind. When I want to stop, can I stop? Or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, so that's my body. When I drink, can I call my numbers? You're probably an alcoholic. And the reason it says probably an alcoholic is because this book can't diagnose you as an alcoholic, right? That's for me. It says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. There is also a page that I can't quite remember the page number, where if I am not sure about whether or not I'm an alcoholic or whether or not I can stop on my own accord, to step on over to the nearest bar and take a drink and try and keep it to just one drink, 1 or 2 drinks. So really the only way I can diagnose myself as an alcoholic is through my own experience, right? So if you think you're an alcoholic, then you might be an alcoholic.
And I've even heard people say that if you're not an alcoholic, then you probably wouldn't be questioning if you're an alcoholic.
This is true. Probably. However, there are a lot of people who aren't alcoholics who wind up trying to do this program, right?
That's very true.
I've heard of people who go through the whole steps and then think, well, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. Let me go try, and drink, which if you have gone through this program and you feel like you might want to drink, go for it. Try. You might not be an alcoholic. But people going through the program and they think that maybe they can handle it, so then they take a couple drinks and then they're not an alcoholic.
So do you think those people they were just hard drinkers then?
Yeah.
I mean, I still don't think working the steps was harmful.
No. Well, because the book says that essentially that this is a program that's beneficial to all.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a whole bunch of different fellowships that use this program. Mm-hmm. I personally think a lot of people could benefit, yes, from doing a 12-step program.
For sure. And I really like the way Chloe explains it, that everyone in the world is spiritually sick in some way, right? We're humans. And the thing with alcoholics is that the way that we cope with that spiritual sickness is by drinking. And also there are some non-alcoholics that cope with that by drinking. However, what differentiates us is that we have this physical allergy, this mental obsession.
I love that.
Yeah. And so I just thought that was really cool. She worded it very eloquently in her episode. And it makes a lot of sense.
That whole everybody in the world is spiritually sick really helped me.
Same.
When the pandemic started and everyone was going insane. And I was like, all these people are just spiritually sick.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got like a few minutes left. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about, or maybe an experience or some words of wisdom that you want to leave our listeners with?
Fully conceding to my innermost self. That is not just showing up at a place and saying, hi, I'm Kelly, I'm an alcoholic, right? That's not just admitting that I'm an alcoholic. That is me recognizing without a shadow of a doubt that I've got the body of an alcoholic and the mind of an alcoholic. So recognizing that I will never, ever be able to drink like a normal person.
Yeah.
Right? Even if I was given some sort of like medication to help me control my drinking, I would probably just not take that medication and continue drinking the way that like my body wants to. So my body is alcoholic, and that I've got the mind of an alcoholic, that no matter what I do on my own, no matter how much I will myself to not take a drink, I will at some point take a drink, right? It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be in a few years from now. But that's not just something that I do in step one. That's something that I do every single day. Yeah. Like I am powerless. I'm powerless over a majority of the things, right?
All the things.
I've conceded to my innermost self that I can't run my own life without it, crashing and burning to the ground. Conceding to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic essentially was me admitting that my way wasn't working, and that I needed to try somebody else's way in whom it had worked, who drank like me, right? Yeah. But I have to do that every day as well. So like conceding to my innermost self that I don't have control over the weather, which is literally something that I have been in fear about lately because I'm going backpacking this weekend and I cannot control the weather. Yeah. So conceding to my innermost self that no matter how much I wish the weather to conform to my desires, it will not. Yeah. Because it's the weather.
And same with our alcoholism, but thank God there's 11 other steps, right?
Yeah. Because if if the whole program of recovery was just me recognizing that I'm an alcoholic and that's it, like no way to really fix it, well, that would stink. Yeah. What does it say? Self-knowledge only got us so far. Yeah. But I got to do some extra steps. So I can't just recognize that I'm an alcoholic and expect things to change. Right. I have to put in the work. I have to do action.
But we need that acceptance of step one to have the willingness to put in that action. Right?
Yeah, because I wouldn't have been willing
to which is something I love about you. It's just you're always willing, and it's really
I was
inspiring.
Really desperate when I got sober. Yeah. And I still am.
Wow. This has been so much fun.
Yes.
And so for our listeners, if you liked what you heard, please feel free to share it with a sponsee, share it with another woman who you think it might help. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and I'll catch you next time on Studying the Steps.
We hope you've enjoyed this From the Vault re-release of the Magdalen House podcast. Tune in every first and third Wednesday for a new release from one of our 3 podcast series. To learn more about the Magdalen House and the services we offer, visit magdalenhouse.org or follow us on your favorite social media channels by searching for The Magdalen House.